Hello, and you're listening to EcoJustice Radio, a project of SoCal 350 Climate Action. Our show presents environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame, featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Welcome, I am Jessica Aldridge. On today's show, the neuroscience of bottom-up governance, creating a resilient future. Host Carrie Kim will be interviewing Max Henning, neuroscientist and president of Novus think tank. Max Henning believes that a new model of human nature, based on recent research on emotion and feeling, is critical for building a flourishing and resilient future. Max began his career as a neuroscientist at the University of Southern California, where he worked with Dr. Antonio Damasio, studying the molecular and evolutionary basis of feeling, emotion, and social behavior. Inspired by his research about the potential of cooperative problem solving, he founded Novus Think Tank, an organization for bottom-up, community-driven positive change. He is currently working on bringing this model of bottom-up governance to the public sphere and is currently a graduate student in democracy and governance at Georgetown University.
Aloha, this is Carrie Kim. Listeners, we have a unique show tonight to invoke your pondering, inspired by our guest, Max Henning, president of Novus Think Tank. We will be diving into the field of neuroscience, human nature, feeling, and visioning a resilient future where all can thrive. We thank the Tongva ancestors for their enduring presence, legacy, and stewardship of this area. Our show comes to you from the homelands of the Tongva and all of their relatives. And we invite you to align with and actively support local First Nations, their homelands, and their lifeways wherever you live. These past few years, marked by the pandemic, have been fraught with turbulence and uncertainty, as well as catalyzed a growing collective desire to dream in a healthy, functioning society that allows all to thrive. Witnessing local to global failures to protect that which we hold sacred, including our living relatives and the natural world, will ultimately lead us to the better world we wish to experience. Threats to democracy, autonomy, diversity, and culture are evident around the globe, amidst a rise in autocratic leaders and the forwarding of globalist, nationalistic, corporate, and/or elitist agendas. How to manifest the world of our dreams, how to advance the causes of justice, equality, freedom, and true compassionate regard for all life. How might we create systems of governance that actually support the common good? Max Henning is here to shed light on why the future of humanity depends upon our reconnection to biological understanding of feeling, and how feeling serves as the underpinning for a vibrant, resilient democracy and an engaged citizenry that supports it. Welcome, Max. Thank you so much for joining us today to ponder humanity's future.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Could you first give us some background into your work as a neuroscientist at USC and your studies with world-renowned neuroscientist Dr. Antonio Damasio? What were some of the key things you discovered about human nature during your time together?
I studied neuroscience at USC and was really fortunate to get a chance to work as a research assistant with Dr. Damasio in the Brain and Creativity Institute for a few years after graduating. The main thing that really stuck out to me from the lab, and I didn't know about Dr. Damasio, I didn't know about the lab, but he basically became well known for several key discoveries. And one of the main one really is that feeling this experience, emotions, feeling these experiences that we often think of as being in conflict with reason and really things that we shouldn't pay that much attention to. His big discovery was that those experiences are deeply rooted in the state of the body, and they are in fact vital for reason and for effective decision making. So prior to invention of these machines that allow us to look inside someone's brain, we haven't been able to understand where feelings come from or what they are or what they're for. And that has led us largely throughout history to devalue them, create stories around them, consider them to be not as good guides for our actions as reason or whatever else. Very recently, in the last 30 years or so, the ability to look inside the brain and identify areas that are active in different feeling states consistently across people kind of turns this view on its head and shows that these experiences actually have deep evolutionary roots. They are real, they are valuable, they are consistent across people, and we can understand the principles that exist within them systematically in the language of science. And that is a new development in human knowledge that is really quite profound. And we could talk for about 48 hours about it, but that's the basis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, was that time together with Dr. Damasio part of what inspired you to create Novus think tank?
Yes. So with Dr. Damasio, my work was I was studying the molecular basis for positive and negative feeling. What's going on in the body when we have these experiences, and how can we make sense of what they mean and what they're for. Mm-hmm. And this was fascinating stuff to be digging into as a young scientist. But really, where it started to hit home for me was when I started realizing that what it was that we had missed. We built society around the idea that feeling is not something that we should value, that we should try to be as unemotional as possible. And the societies that we've built around those ideas have struggled a lot. They've done a lot really well. We have great technology and wonderful medicine, but there are also huge shortfalls in terms of, ecological degradation, just for one, huge amount of human suffering, erosion of the ecological, fabric to an extent that may not be salvageable. These are huge errors that we've allowed to happen in the development of our society. And that societal development has, the key feature of it to me is that it has been ignorant of, it has ignored, it has dismissed the importance of feeling in decision making. And why is this important? Why does it actually? Why is that the case? I think that if it's true that feeling is grounded in the state of our body, and positive and negative feeling correspond to states of life that are better for us for survival or worse for us for survival, then we can see in feeling a series of guideposts towards flourishing. And what is flourishing? We often think of flourishing as being our own individual well-being, but that can't possibly be the case because we simply depend for food and air on plants and animals. That's just the basis, to say nothing of our social interdependencies, and it goes on and on. So our own flourishing as humans is totally dependent on the flourishing of the broader living systems that we're a part of. Mm-hmm. And feeling, as the inherent guide that orients us towards flourishing and away from disease and pain, feeling is very likely a guide in the direction of working towards securing not only our own well-being, but also the well-being of these broader living systems. And I think the fact that we've missed feeling, missed the importance of it, missed the possibility of respecting it as a legitimate guide for our lives, is a huge contributing factor to why we consistently fail to see our own well-being as fundamentally interconnected with that of the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say, society, the development of society, but I think it's important to distinguish, Western society, not, for example, the societies of indigenous peoples, because they definitely, I would say, they definitely are rooted in feeling and connectedness. I wanted to ask you, what is the purpose or our aims of Novus think tank itself?
Right. So as an undergraduate at USC, it became sort of apparent to me that and this wasn't like a unique observation, but that if things didn't change in the world and the trajectories we were on, things would be pretty terrible by the time my generation hit retirement age or, midlife even. Mm-hmm. And that realization stuck with me a lot. There are few things that seem quite as sad to me as the prospect of like entering one's twilight years with the recognition that the world is like on the trajectory that it could be on towards, serious ecosystem collapse, world war, mass migration, really, dark stuff. And at that point, there'd be very little that, I would be able to be of use for in doing something about it. But I realized that as an undergraduate, the thing that you have available is time. And so, you have 30, 40 years of a career where you can try to be useful in some way. I had a hard time finding other students at first that sort of shared this kind of obsession, but then I realized that they must be out there. And so Novus began basically as this plea to find, other students who wanted to spend their time thinking about the future, thinking about what we could do about it, and try to sort of set gears in motion so that we could enter our careers on a path where we might be able to actually be a part of shifting trajectories a bit over the long term. Mm-hmm. The basic idea of it was that every individual has, based on their past experiences, we're all kind of coded for certain problems in the world. Certain things matter more to us than they do to other people. Sometimes that's frustrating because we think everybody should care the most about what we care about. But really, if you think, or I figured that it was actually kind of a beautiful thing because it suggests that if you get enough people, you'll have all the problems. Somebody will be focused on all of them.
There'll be someone there. Yeah. I think that's very interesting too, like circular leadership.
Yeah. So the idea was that if we could just get people from different backgrounds who cared about different things and help them to trust their felt motives to, be useful in the world and try to understand these problems and do something about them, that we might be able to do something really cool. So it started as a student organization, and the idea is that the same model can be applied in, the professional world also. But basically just this idea of collaborative, community-based problem solving and solution building, where the main direction isn't chosen by any sort of leadership figure, but the idea is that everybody has issue areas that are frustrating to them. And sometimes the most fulfilling thing you can do is to work on those issues that matter most to you and do so within a supportive community. And people who work on issues that are most important to them within a supportive community are likely to do some of the best work because they're intrinsically motivated. They have that creative ability. So that was the basic idea. And it's something that I've come back to over and over again in the past years.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have a nonprofit that's tied to it as well, or that's coming? I know I went on your website and it.
Yeah, there is a nonprofit entity. It's a different challenge to build something like this in the professional world than it is, on campus. Mm-hmm. Basically, we're in the process now of exploring what it looks like to implement similar structures in other organizations or within cities. Mm-hmm. And the cities is going to be, a little bit down the line, but the idea is that you would be able to generate some civic engagement beyond simply voting, that you would be able to activate some civic energy around issues that matter to individual people, build a sense of solidarity and community, and offer a way of understanding your felt motives for change in a way that's really empowering and that can make sense to elected leaders also, instead of just having it be a yelling match. But some of the successes so far have been within organizations. And specifically, that was why the Birdhouse is the link between us. They were one of the first organizations that reached out. Jessica from the Birdhouse was really wonderful. She reached out and she said that they wanted to try to put some sort of a Novus type model in place at the Birdhouse. And so we've been piloting we did a series of focus groups, and now we've been piloting a community think tank within the Birdhouse. And it's been really exciting. I mean, we're sort of seeing how this works, and we're figuring out how to adjust the model based on being in a nonprofit relative to with a bunch of students. But the core ideas are really.
So the Birdhouse is an arts and ecology center centered in Hollywood. And they are also an ecological restoration camp. an ecosystem restoration camp. But I wanted to ask you and have you define in a biological understanding of feeling.
Yes. So this is the core element of Dr. Damasio's work. And the simplest way to say it is that feeling is the mental expression of biological processes of life regulation. That's a bit of jargon, but it's the central idea is that feeling has a biological basis. Mm-hmm. And what it is that we're feeling, the content of our feeling when we feel angry or stressed or anxious, what we feel is changes in the state of our bodies. So you feel tension in your throat, tightness in your veins and in your musculature. Your diaphragm contracts, the stomach becomes a little more tense. These are geometric changes within the body that serve as the physical basis for the sensation, the mental phenomenon of feeling stressed or anxious or frustrated. And so what I mean when I say a biological understanding of feeling, it encompasses like this huge amount of scholarship, but really the core insight is that these experiences, feelings that we have sort of neglected throughout time since ancient Greece, when people decided that feeling was not as good as reason. Feelings they tell us about the state of our body. Dr. Damasio's key insight was, he was a neurologist, and he found that feelings are put together. It used to be thought that they were put together in the most front part of the brain, the most recently evolved human-only part of the brain. Instead, it turns out that feeling depends on the brainstem, which is the oldest, part of the brain that we have. What the brainstem does is it brings signals from throughout the body into the brain. It's like a major highway. It's just bringing tons and tons of chemical and electrical signals from the body, saying everything about how you're doing throughout the body to the brain and then back down. And so if you were to take a cross-section of that structure, you'd see a picture, an image of the state of your life at any given moment. And that image of the state of your life at any given moment is the key constituent element so that is the basic, when I say a biological understanding of feeling, there's a lot wrapped up in it, but the essential idea is that these experiences are rooted in the state of our life, and they are critical guides for our survival, because our survival depends on us meeting the needs of the body, as those needs change throughout our lives.
I think you also said that because it was found to be located in the brainstem, that it also changed the view that it was a human-only thing, that feelings are only the province of humans, correct?
Certainly. I mean, this is an active area of lively debate, but in the school of thought that I was trained in, and that I find extremely compelling, the idea is that any organism that has a nervous system, and so you can trace them back, and it probably varies by degree. And Dr. Damasio has written volumes on this topic, but the basic idea is that feeling is it's made possible by nervous systems, but the basic processes underneath it, these basic principles of life regulation, where you need to get more nutrients when you're running out of nutrients, etc. Those basic principles have been around since the beginning of time. I mean, they've been around since bacteria first emerged. And these are single-celled organisms that definitely didn't think, but they had the basic organizing elements that when you add nervous systems, you have the ability to create images of the state of life within the organism, and then you have the ability to have feeling.
Max, hold that thought right now. We are going to take a break, and we'll come back to speak a bit more about the relationship of democracy and the level of feeling.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. We air every Friday at 4 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles and Sundays at 4 p.m. on KPFT Houston. Stay connected by subscribing to EcoJustice Radio on all major podcast apps, and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you are listening to The Neuroscience of Bottom-Up Governance, Creating a Resilient Future, with host Carrie Kim and guest Max Henning, neuroscientist and president of Novus Think Tank.
So, Max, in one of your articles, you stated that modern democracy is vulnerable to disruption at the level of feeling. Could you elaborate on this, what you mean by this?
Certainly. Yeah. So this is a bit of a switch, but basically when I was in the lab, the 2016 elections happened and the subsequent years. And it became sort of clear to me that the things that we were studying, how it is that feelings work and how they change our behaviors in pretty profound ways, that knowledge, whether or not it was conscious or not, was being leveraged to change people's behavior in an anti-democratic way. People were being provoked into fear and anger really systematically. And this is an age-old phenomenon. If you make people scared and angry, then you can get them to behave in very predictable ways, and it's not democratic. What was frustrating to me is that the folks who were advocating for democratic strengthening didn't seem to have the same sort of grasp of the importance of feeling in guiding behavior as the folks trying to tear democracy apart. So the folks trying to rebuild democracy often rely on reason and they rely on statistics and information, but they're very resistant to appeal to feelings because they're trained that feelings and emotions are these base processes that you have to suppress if you want to be a good, civilized person. So what I mean when I say that democracy is vulnerable to disruption at the level of feeling, it's essentially that these structures of democracy, institutions, processes, they set up these containers within which people act. You vote, you get information, you talk to your friends and neighbors, you set up civil society organizations, you engage in your community, and you do it all within these basic democratic structures. The democratic structures, for them to work, require that people are rational. And now, the rational means something different in their field. What they mean by rational is that you will pursue your long-term self-interest. You will be thoughtful and considerate and appreciate the wonder of a rules-based social order and the benefits that brings to you relative to if there was a king. The problem is that when people's lives are really hard, like materially hard, like they don't have enough food, or they're really vulnerable, or for whatever reason, or somebody's just like juicing them with fear and anger from their TV station, from their news outlets, from their relatives, whatever. When people are in that kind of state of chronic stress, chronic fear, stress, anger, whatever, they aren't thinking about the long-term benefits of democratic, moderate, cooperative political behavior. They're thinking about, how do I stay safe right now? How do I protect my social group and get by? What that means is that, the implication of this is that basically the structures that exist now, they don't have any defense against the provocation of fear and anger. And that's what I mean when I say that democracy is vulnerable. There's no defense against the provocation to fear and anger. And we've seen the effect of that provocation over the last, 4 or 6 years. What I advocate in that paper, and this is sort of one of the early formulations of this idea, what I advocate in that paper is that it should be possible to deepen the institutions of democracy so that they actually do act on the level of feeling to produce and encourage and nurture feelings that are conducive to democratic behavior, such as an identification with outgroup, a sense of safety and belonging, a sense of legacy, self-agency within your community, a sense of identification with the sort of democratic process and democratic system of pluralism. Those are experiences that institutions can cultivate if they want to. But it hasn't been part of democratic theorists' toolkit until now, because democratic theorists have been trained from a very early age and for a very long time to try to just suppress feeling as much as possible and build these structures only around the need for reason, which unfortunately leaves them vulnerable to these provocateurs, which we've seen.
So how do you envision that might look in society? If you were to have those things, how would you go about creating that specifically? I mean, especially given in our society, most people barely even know their neighbor, let alone their name or anything about them. I mean, there is so much disconnection in cities within local neighborhoods. I mean, how do you move from, here to there?
These are huge questions, obviously. and they can be answered at several levels. I think the most interesting answer is actually to go to a theory from Elinor Ostrom, who is well known within much of the sort of ecological restoration world. Elinor Ostrom won a phenomenal scholar. She won a Nobel Prize for her work challenging the tragedy of the commons idea. And the tragedy of the commons is that when you have a commons, public resource, people, because we're all greedy and selfish inherently, we will deplete that resource. We will waste the commons, we'll ruin it. And Professor Ostrom challenged that very profoundly by identifying case studies where commons resources were not destroyed, and identifying certain elements of governance principles that allowed for that to happen. But the really, the interesting thing about her work that I'm going to bring in here is this concept of co-production. And it's this idea that when elected leaders, local city council, whatever, they are responsible for providing public services. Mm-hmm. And there's often an idea that citizens are consumers of public services, that citizens just sort of sit back, you consume what the government provides, and you don't really have to do anything. The government is the provider and you're the consumer. That model is very disempowering. It totally takes the citizens out of the equation of governance, which...
Wouldn't you say that's deliberate?
It's certainly possible. I know a lot of citizens who probably prefer it that way. They would rather not have to be engaged in the business of governing. But I do think that it has real problematic effects.
Sure.
And so one of the things that I think is a really compelling angle to sort of rebuilding these experiences of engagement and of self-governance is, and this has been done in several countries, notably Ghana, in the way that they are managing some water resources in local communities. Basically, the city council will ask the citizens for help, deciding what services they want, how to evaluate the success of the services, and then also in the provision of the services and the maintaining of that infrastructure. And it's very simple, really. It's just that you ask the citizens for help. People like to be asked for help. They like to be useful. Citizens want to have a sense of stake in their own flourishing and in the well-being of their community. And this radical idea that governments and citizens can work together to produce goods and services that the people want is transforming the relationship between citizens and local governments in the parts of the world where it's being applied. And I think that model of a more collaborative, open-handed, asking for help relationship between elected leaders and citizens is really compelling. It's really compelling because the citizens want it. Mm-hmm. And also the elected officials have an incentive to want it too, because they want to govern well. They ostensibly want to be reelected. Their reelection depends in large part on them delivering at least a little bit on their promises. Mm-hmm. And so what's the best way of making sure you deliver on your promises? Ask the people how you're doing and how you can do better, regularly, consistently, in like an official forum. So the reason I feel that that's a promising angle is that the incentives align for both parties. And I actually think that just by getting something like that started, and there are already some citizen assemblies or similar processes, but getting something started where there's a real bottom-up flow of ideas, of needs, of perspectives into the policymaking process at a local level, it's a really important place to start.
Mm-hmm. There are so many things that need to be addressed. I mean, of course, the first thing we think about is the amount of money that has entered politics and how entrenched that is, as well as corporate influence. I mean, there's a lot of things that have just made people completely distrust systems of governance and to feel that they're so far corrupted that's, impossible to rectify.
That is the case. And that's actually why you're spot on. This is the world that we're living in.
It's not where the story ends, though.
That remains to be seen, honestly. When I think about any of these challenges, about the large challenges like climate change or massive disease outbreaks or poverty and inequality, I mean, anything, it's a little bit difficult to see how any of them get addressed given the current lack of function in the governance systems. And that's why, for me, I try to go as far back to the source of democratic processes as I can. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's people. democracy is often thought of as just being about the institutions and the structures. And when we build democracies in other places in the world, one of the big problems that we've perpetuated is that we often think that all we have to do is build really strong state institutions. Strong meaning backed by force, and then with the ability to punish. It was a very popular idea for a long time. Thank goodness it is starting to, that is not so popular anymore. But basically, the idea has been that the strength of the government comes from the strength of the state. And somehow we've totally missed that from the very beginning, democracy was about people coming together, trying to figure out how to pool resources, solve problems, and do so in a way that's fair and just and reasonable. And so to me, the only place that it really makes sense to go back to, especially just given that I don't have the platform to like take on Wall Street or something, as much as I wish I did. The thing that makes sense to me, the place where I am sort of called to focus is on rebuilding this sort of bottom-up energy that I believe needs to be the basis if we want to have any sort of accountable governance structure. If we want to have politicians elected that make commitments to transparency and follow those commitments and don't take as much money as they can from corporate interests, that's going to have to come from people. There's no other lever that's going to hold those folks accountable.
Right.
And people aren't going to do it unless they actually think about it, take the time, and organize. And that takes effort. And they're only going to put in the effort if they feel that it really matters to them. And they're only going to feel that it really matters to them if they can experience at a very small level that they have a stake in the process of self-government. And that's kind of why I focus on that. There are infinite other, angles on these problems, but that's the only one that I see plausible. Right. For me. I'm not saying it's the only one, but for me,
I think a lot of people would definitely agree, especially after everything that people have witnessed throughout the pandemic itself. I mean, that was a massive marker for people, I think, to see things are broken. They need fixing. They're not necessarily going to be fixed from the inside. And so I think that is the call to activism for every single person living on the planet. Actually, that's what's required in our times. And from there, I want to switch a bit to solutionarianism. I want to ask you whether there are any caveats to solutionarianism, which is, a lot of people like to focus on solutions. That seems to arise to me out of an Anthropocene perspective, instead of viewing human beings as part of an intrinsic, already functioning whole, because primarily, it is humanity that has caused the imbalance in the ecosystem at large. It's humanity that's really responsible for many of the ills that face this planet right now on a larger scale. So what do you have to say about this notion of solutions and how people have kind of come with that mindset of, I think, prematurely going to solution without really diving deep into what is the problem and what are the actions that have led to the problem, and just sitting with that before ever setting foot towards a solution?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Well, it's a huge problem at scale, but I'm going to sort of take it to a micro, which is it's a huge problem we encountered in Novus, actually, because people are they're raring to go. They care about something. You've given them permission to care. You've given them, a sense of capability in design, in being effective in some way that matters. They want to start thinking about solutions. They have ideas already. The problem is that if you think about the solution from within the same mental model as the default mental model, you're not actually solving anything. Mm-hmm. You're just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And so when we figured this out, we started doing putting into the curriculum a process of root cause analysis, which is very simple. I mean, you just ask why like 5 times. Why? And if you do it right, I mean, and it's not actually that simple. You basically, the root cause analysis process, it's supposed to get at these underlying structural elements that you don't normally think about, but that are really constraining whatever issue getting resolved there is. But I think for me, even that's not really sufficient. I think that you have to begin from the model of, and we're getting back to human nature now, the way that we think about humans, what matters to humans, how we act. Are we fundamentally cooperative? Do we prefer that? Or do we prefer to be violent and aggressive and selfish? The way that you see these basic elements of how people behave, that is critical for determining how you're going to think about solution building. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really vital that we critically examine these models of human nature that we've sort of been inculcated with, because they're limited. I mean, they're really not compelling at all. You can make a much stronger case that humans are fundamentally cooperative. Our basic evolutionary advantage is that we can cooperate really well. It's more energy efficient to cooperate. It's very costly to be combative and violent. Mm-hmm. And cooperation feels better. Like, at the end of the day, like that. So there's feeling, right? Feeling is guiding us towards cooperation, towards gratitude, towards compassion, towards long-term relationships and friendships and trust. That's all feels very good, very energy efficient, way better in terms of a model for behavior. And I think if we're able to go from the model of human behavior as selfish and angry and divisive and power hungry, realize that, yes, those are patterns of behavior that we have, but our organism does not prefer them.
Right.
They're supposed to be used only in emergencies. We have this other mode that we're oriented to by feeling intrinsically. Mm-hmm. And if we approach problem solving, solution building, whatever, from the model of we are biological creatures driven towards cooperation, compassion, reciprocity, trust, and within a sort of network of interdependence with the broader biological system, from that basis, I think we can actually start to think about solutions in a way that may not fall into the same trap.
Very, very well said, Max. Thank you. We're going to take a break right here, and then we'll return to talk a bit more about solutions and human nature.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying EcoJustice Radio. We air every Friday at 4 p.m. on KPFK Los Angeles and Sundays at 4 p.m. on KPFT Houston. Stay connected by subscribing to EcoJustice Radio on all major podcast apps and visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, to check out previous shows and guests and get connected with us on social media. For an extended version of this interview, as well as other benefits, we encourage you to become a member of our Patreon. Today, you are listening to The Neuroscience of Bottom-Up Governance, Creating a Resilient Future with host Carrie Kim and guest Max Henning, neuroscientist and president of Novus Think Tank.
So, Max, we've been talking about solutions and also human nature and response to solutions, and the fact that humans, by nature, we could perceive humans as collaborative, or on the other end of the spectrum as greedy and selfish and self-serving. And is there any risk in seeing life as a problem to solve? Because some people do see life that way. They kind of are always solving the problem.
As opposed to existing, being, just flowing.
Yeah, I mean, being in life and maybe being part of life and observing life instead of always trying to fix something that's broken. And also, there's also something in not being able to see what is working in the ecosystem still. We have to turn to nature for that, to see and observe, just as like the Taoists or yogics or monks would have observed the world, or indigenous peoples for millennia, to understand how to be in the world, how to act in the world, and how even to govern.
I think those are excellent points. I think they're a little bit, to me, they seem a little bit distinct. And I just flat out agree with the second one. So I'm going to go to the first one because I think we can discuss that a bit. I think you're getting at something really important, which is, as I understand it, a kind of a fixation, a sort of manic fixation on solving the problem, which has all kinds of baggage in history, and it's just there's a real issue there. I guess the way that I would take it is to say that when you're hungry and you eat healthy, nutritious food, sourced responsibly, etc., that's solving a problem. I struggle at this hour to specifically describe what the difference is between sitting atop the world, trying to like maneuver and change systems that are far more complex than I could possibly comprehend, and causing huge spillover negative effects in the process, versus the kind of life regulatory problem solving that happens moment by moment. There's a concept of homeostasis, which is thought of as the balance, the steady state of life, the equilibrium state. And the idea of balance is sort of misleading, actually, because this is an energy intensive process. Maintaining life, any living system, it's constantly using energy to warm the temperature, cool the temperature, build the immune cells, pump the nutrients to the right places, find the nutrients, defend against whatever. To me, it feels as though there's a difference, a qualitative difference in that kind of problem solving, which is an adaptive system trying to
meet its needs,
meet its needs, as opposed to like a individual agent on top of a hierarchy, like tinkering with a blunt instrument into a complicated web. That's the distinction that comes to mind to me. When I think about solution building, and it's actually a very good prompt. I need to be more specific in this, and I will probably do some writing about this either later today or tomorrow. I think there is a really potent distinction to be made. And I personally, when I think about solution building, I am drawn to this variety that is life itself trying to exist more efficiently, more sustainably, more interdependently, in the way that produces these incredibly complex ecosystems.
Right.
That's the result of problem solving over huge amounts of time.
We had Dee Dee Pershouse on the show, and she's an ecological advocate and educator. Probably, maybe you know her work. But one of the things she had mentioned is that one of the perspectives that we can come from, or we can view the world from, is that of seeing the world as how can we regenerate the world? How can we have more of that regenerative way and actions in the world that perpetuate life itself? So it's a really different, more rather than being kind of a problem to solve, it moves more in the direction of creativity or wonder or awe. And it's a different way of addressing things that are happening in the world that feels more regenerative. Do you know what I mean?
I'm not familiar with her work. It sounds interesting. Do you understand regeneration as being like something that we actively do for ecosystems?
I think it's something that we participate in. We participate in the regeneration, but that it's really Mother Earth. It's just kind of being an assistant to Mother Earth.
That resonates for me because I think of, life is itself generative. When I think of regenerating and why we need to regenerate, or why ecosystems need to be regenerated, I often think of it in terms of, and not say this is just my one limited perspective on this. What comes to mind for me is that the regeneration will happen naturally in the absence of the obstacles and constraints that we have imposed. And I think about this for society, for social groups, for harmonious relationships. It's less about building something on top, and more how can we get rid of the thing that's hindering the harmony coming forth.
I think that's kind of like what I was saying about recognizing that there is this intrinsic, already functioning whole. We've just kind of thrown a wrench into that, but it's already functioning, and it's still functioning unbelievably so that it can, even with everything that we've thrown at this planet to cause destruction, devastation, etc. Not only, I don't want to say that we've only done that, but definitely we've played a large part. The other thing
You've done a number.
Quite a number. I wanted to bring up something else around solutions and what we were talking about as far as solutionariness, because I've never been a real fan of the kind of solution mentality, but focusing on solutions, I think, also can afford us an easy exit from confronting things that precede that, which might be grief, heartbreak, loss, sadness, anger, and those emotions that would arise if we actually sit with the problems of the world and that we've played a part in it. What has been our responsibility in that? And I think part of that we need to own, and we need to confront that before actually trying to fix anything or resolve anything. Is we need to actually go, wow, this has happened on our watch.
This hurts.
And it hurts. And we have to be able to be with that instead of just rushing to solutions, to that feel good place of we've solved something as if it's once and for all, which is totally unrealistic. It's not once and for all, otherwise, like we've said, these cycles, they perpetuate themselves using the same mental framework. You perpetuate itself if you try to solve it from the same standpoint.
Absolutely. I think that's another really good point. I am no authority on Western society's aversion to grief and pain, but it does make sense to me that part of the urge to be in constant motion, forward motion, reward seeking, whatever, never stopping, never just feeling or being, is in large part due to the fact that we don't have the social support structures, community traditions, or relationship with the natural world to feel held in a moment of stillness. If we sit back to really notice the state of things and how we've contributed to the horrific suffering that exists everywhere, we're deprived of the support structures that we would need in order to be okay with that realization. So, Western society, I guess that's a good container. It has us as these atomized individuals, separate from a family unit, separate from a community unit, separate from the ecological unit. And I think that societies where there is more of an integration between the family, within the broader community, even without groups, and then, of course, within the ecological environment, I think it makes sense to me that there may be more of a ability to comfortably sit with, a moment of quiet, a moment of observation, because even if there is grief and pain and deep hurt, you're not alone in the same way. You're in communion with all time and, all beings that have ever been. And that's a very different state to be in grief than a lonely island of self-determination where,
that sounds very,
I kind of get why there's this inclination for people to just never stop. And if you do stop, medicate away all thought and feeling. And I think it's part of the same disconnect. If we, and this is my lens, and so I keep coming back to this, but if we were to understand that the feelings that we would be feeling, the grief, the pain, those are motives to seek support, right? Those are feelings that indicate that we have undergone damage or there is damage that we are participating in. Those feelings motivate us to seek support, safety, healing. Where do you find support, safety, healing? Others, nature, broader networks that give us, that kind of strength. And if we don't understand that those feelings are guiding us to that kind of social reintegration, then all that we can do is just suppress them because we think the feeling itself is bad. We shouldn't have the feeling. We should just be strong, purposeful, whatever, fight on through it. But the feeling is telling us what we're supposed to do in that state. If you feel the grief and feel the pain, it is a signal that you need to reintegrate with the world. Before solving, it's very hard to summon the energy to solve problems or do anything active when you're feeling grief, pain, hurt, overwhelm. Those are not active states. They are reconnect with others states.
I like that you said that it's a reconnect with others, that it's a signal for that, to not just be isolated in your grief and your pain, that it's natural to actually feel that is a signal to be in communion with others. And that, I think, was one of the great travesties of the pandemic, because people underwent, and children especially, and youth underwent such great social isolation that really left a scar on so many people. But, I want to diverge from there to then bring this into this notion of isolation, and also talking about abiotic systems and biotic systems, with life and maybe in some ways against life, and what technology, the role that technology has played in that. So with technological advancements, we were leaning far into abiotic realms and systems. And I would say it's far away from feeling, although I know people always tell me that one day there'll be a computer that can feel. What do you have to say about the balance in our use of technology so that we continue to have the capacity to feel as human beings, not as machines?
Once again, a great question. I think this is one of the more concerning developments. A quick caveat is that, not caveat, but aside, one of my previous colleagues at the BCI, Kingston Mann, he wrote a paper about what it would take for a robot that could feel. Mm-hmm. And his hypothesis was that it's impossible unless the materials of the robot, the plastic and the metal, was vulnerable, was a material that could degrade and was in danger of death, essentially. Because when you have a rigid, robust machine that doesn't break, it's metal, what is it going to do to a metal robot? Part of what feeling is it comes from tissues that are deeply vulnerable. His hypothesis was that a big part of what you would need to bring to robotics is that vulnerability of the system. The system would have to become concerned with its survival. And it's not enough to just think about my battery running out. You have to actually think about the integrity of your physical system. Mm-hmm. So he had an interesting hypothesis there. I don't have a whole lot to say about this, except that I think the rush to bring AI into our brains without first understanding feeling is really a big concern. I think it's pretty dumb, honestly. I'm not surprised because it fits the pattern of acceleration of hyper rationalism that has been so attractive for so long. But I do hope very much that I think there is a counter tide that is a much more humanist focused reconnect with our nature as feeling organisms. Mm-hmm. I think that is a movement that is also happening at the same time as this push towards making us all into Iron Men. And I'm very hopeful that the movement that is trying to deepen our understanding of these basic principles that drive us in the first place will be able to gain enough momentum to meaningfully challenge the push to turn us all into cyborgs, which, that will be the end if it happens. And it will be a huge catastrophe. It would just be a bummer. It'd be really sad because we will have failed to get the point for the entirety of human existence that we're just supposed to pay attention to these guideposts of life and live in communion with the world. If we can't get that, game's up.
What, given that, on that note, what encourages you about the future? You have just said some of that, I guess, in saying that there is this movement of people and also this kind of a humanistic movement to reconnect us to what is our true purpose in being here? What were we designed for already? What is inherent? So what do you have to say about the future?
Well, I think I am hopeful, very hopeful, partly by necessity, because a state of hope allows you to keep going. I do think there are real reasons for hope, though, one of which is that despite our best efforts, we haven't managed to get rid of feeling. We haven't managed to completely stamp out this process. And we've tried really hard for 2,000 years. We've tried extremely hard to absolutely to distill human reason from our base animalistic, emotion. We've tried super hard for a really long time, and we haven't been able to do it. And still, these basic moral elements of care and compassion and empathy, they resonate really powerfully, and they motivate people every day, to act in that way. So I think there's kind of it's very hard to actually shut down these basic processes that guide us towards flourishing in a cooperative and compassionate way. Mm-hmm. That's one piece. And then the other piece really is that we do have new knowledge available to us in the form of, we don't have to rely on philosophy or on metaphysics to understand our place and the way that we can live. we can look to neuroscience and biology to understand these felt experiences that we've relied on story and narrative and religion to explain forever. The fact that we can use science to do that now, and that we can come to similar conclusions with it, I think is really, it speaks to a bit of a paradigm shift in our understanding of ourselves and our ability to live in alignment with it.
Max, thank you so much for your work in the world and for the fact that you took up that mantle of how could you contribute, with the life that you have before you. How are you going to engage within that? And thank you so much for inspiring others to do the same. Could you give some of your links and advise us how listeners can stay in contact with you and your work and Novus Think Tank, or other links that you want to share?
Sure. I think the easiest right now is a website link, maxahenning.com. I'm also on the social platforms, but not super actively. I'm not great at the marketing side of this, to be honest. I'm very much in the building mode. But yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested, I would honestly direct them to some of Damasio's work. Mm-hmm. There's some really incredible stuff there. And, I think for now, actually, there are very few resources that are available that are bringing these threads together. I hope that in the next few years, there'll be more. Mm-hmm. And I'll try to be more active on social media to share them.
Thank you again, Max, for joining us today and for all that you're bringing forth and reminding us what is the true purpose of feeling for human beings.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for sharing these stories. It's really been a pleasure, and your questions have been awesome.
Thank you to our guest, Max Henning, and thank you to our listeners for joining us. This has been the Neuroscience of Bottom-Up Governance, Creating a Resilient Future. For an extended version of this interview, become a member of our Patreon or visit our website at ecojusticeradio.org. Please connect with us on social media. You can find us at EcoJustice Radio, SoCal 350, and Adventures in Waste. If you like what you heard and you want others to be informed, well, you know what to do. Subscribe and share the episodes and help us continue our efforts by joining our Patreon or making a tax-deductible donation to the show. A project of SoCal 350, the show can be found on KPFK, KPFT, all major podcast apps, and at ecojusticeradio.org. Executive producer Jack Ite, producer and co-host Jessica Aldridge, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.